Hi. Hello, everyone. So, I'm Jivat. I'm the India lead for scholarship track, and today we have Governess with us. She's a PM intern at Microsoft, and she was a Google Software Sprint intern also. And we're really grateful to have her here. Hi, Governess.
Yes, hello. Thank you so much for having me. And just correction, I'm a participant, not an intern
Uh,
from Google. Not an intern.
okay. So, we'll start with a few questions with Governess, and after that, we'll have a live Q&A at the end. So the first question is around can you elaborate on the
Yeah, I can elaborate on those programs more. So for the Explore program, that is a program specifically for undergraduates who are in years 1 and 2. It's targeted a lot toward underclassmen who maybe have just gotten into the computer science major, and they're still exploring what they're interested in and what they want to do. Um, for that, it's essentially a rotational program in the summer. It is for it's 8 weeks of software engineering and then 4 weeks of program management. So it's really designed to allow students to learn more about which part in tech they want to go into further on in their career. It's also a great way to get introduced to Microsoft and to learn more about what's going on in the company, learn the culture, learn some teams that they might be interested in. And it's a great segue into potentially getting a more formal internship as a software engineer or a program manager intern as a return offer. So it's a great way to get your foot in the door. That's the Explore program. And then we have the Google Product Sprint, which is originally called Code U. I think the biggest misconception of that is that's not an internship program. We're not officially employed through Google. It's essentially a learning only opportunity that's available for students. It's essentially a way, it's like I think it's a 12-week program, a 10-week, one of the two that Google offers for students. It's an invite-only program where you get essentially spend the first 4 weeks just learning on building your own portfolio. So it's a lot of front-end work with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, as well as working with Java in the back end. So it's a great way to kind of, if you wanted to build a website and you've never had that opportunity before, here's your chance to do so. And there's a technical team challenge that you get to work on with a group of other software product sprint participants. So a great way to encourage collaboration skills and working with the technical product, learning about using some of the Google Cloud products and APIs, learning more about getting GitHub, and then just general technical interview prep and professionalism when it comes to preparing for interviews for the recruiting season in the fall. So those are just a high-level overview of the Explore program and Google Product Sprint. I'm more than willing to answer more questions on that if you guys want.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Governess. So the next question is around what is the presentation for program manager roles like, and like how did you prepare for it, and how much coding or technical skills you're actually required to possess for this role in particular?
Yes, that's a really good question because the intern role is going to look different depending on the company and even within the company itself. So I would say overall, I would say the description of what a PM role would be is that it provides clarity and it also helps kind of create an outline for whatever product that you're building. You can either be a business PM, which is a lot more higher level work, very much thinking like the bigger questions, like, the total addressable market and working on marketing, maybe legal aspects. It's very much a high overview. Then you have product PM, a product manager, or feature PMs, I would say, and they work on a very specific product. So in Microsoft, for example, you have a feature PM who's maybe in charge of Microsoft Teams, or a feature PM who's in charge of Microsoft Outlook. So they're the ones kind of leading an entire feature aspect of the company and having different people like help collaborate them to build more improvements towards it. And then you have the technical PMs. These are the ones who tend to have that more coding, computer science background, and they're assigned projects that are like that. And when I say technical, I do want to emphasize that coding for the most part, is not really in PM roles. Now, of course, this is going to vary based on the company and the team that you're on. You could argue that other companies, such as maybe like Amazon or Facebook, their TPM roles, they may involve coding, but in Microsoft specifically, it is very, very rare. Maybe like 5 to 10% of PMs actually code on the job. When I say technical PMs, that's just the scope of it. So maybe a technical PM is working within the kernel, or they're working on like the infrastructure of a product. So that just means that they have the technical background to communicate with the engineers, and it's more frequent between that communication. But in the second part of the question, how much coding tech skills are you expected to possess? It's very useful. I would say that a lot of the PM roles, it's very useful, and it gives you an edge if you have a technical background, because a lot of the products that you'll be releasing are tech focused. You're going to be communicating with the engineers, and having that tech background is essential so that you can establish credibility with them. Because if you want a feature to be released, for example, and it's like it takes this amount of specs that it needs in order for it to be released, you can easily communicate that with an engineer, saying, here, I've been in this role before, here's like the timeline, how long I think it's going to take, and things like that. Because if you just don't have that technical background, engineers may not take you as seriously, as you're not really guiding them in the right direction for that. But that doesn't mean that all PMs need a technical background. I know many PMs who come in as interns, and they're maybe studying business administration, or they're studying other things, marketing, for example. There's like associate PMs. I know Google has those as well. Like as I mentioned, in Microsoft, they're business PMs. So not necessary to have coding or technical skills, but depending on the role or the feature that you want to work on, it can be very useful.
Okay, that adds a lot of clarity. Thanks. So it's not required. What your preparation actually included for both of these programs, for Explore as well as Google Product Sprint?
Right. Sorry. So just so I understand, you're asking how did I prepare for those two roles, or?
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll start with the Explore program, and then we'll go on to the PM role. So the Explore program is more of a software engineering role. There are 4 weeks of PM involved with it, but 8 weeks of the 12 weeks are software engineer. So the requirement for applying for that role is you need to have taken think Calculus 1 and 2. You also need to have taken the what role is it? You needed to have taken at least one computer science class. That's for the Explore. They know that you're going to be a freshman or sophomore when you're applying for those programs. So the interviews are not going to be as challenging technical wise, but they just want to see your passion and that you're interested in tech in that stage. Now let's move on to the PM side of it. Now the PM side, when I did my interviews, there were no coding interviews. There were no technical interviews as if I was coding on a whiteboard. This kind of ties back to what I said before as to you don't really need to have a computer science degree to apply for a PM role, though it could be very useful. What I found to be really useful for PM roles is that it is essentially a role where you are influencing without authority. You are going to be tapping into a lot of different networks. So for a feature that needs to be released, for example, I needed to reach out to the legal team. I needed to talk to the marketing team, the education team, the design team, the engineers. You need to be able to reach out to a lot of these people, and that requires strong communication skills. It requires experience leading a team or leading a project as well. I think those are two main skills, as well as the general organization. So I would say that a great way to prepare for these for the interviews for a PM role is, one, there are a lot of different books that you can purchase to learn more about it. There's the Cracking the PM interview, which is similar to the Cracking the Coding interview. It's by the same person. I purchased that, and that was very helpful because the interviews are very specific to the PM role. They're very situational, like how would you build an alarm clock for the blind type of thing. It's not something you can really prepare for, but you need to have a framework. You need to know, okay, how am I going to address this problem? What questions or issues am I going to bring up? You kind of need a structure, and these books can really help you create that structure for those interviews. I think that's very important for the PM role when you're interviewing for it. For the SPS, as I mentioned before, it is an invite-only program. I got into the program because a recruiter reached out to me and then gave me a link to apply for the program later on. So there wasn't really a way to prepare for it per se, I would say the best way is just to kind of tap into your network, see if there's a Google recruiter at your school, see if there's anyone who is in the program before who can connect you to somebody who is the recruiter at your school. It is very technically intensive. So I will say preparation to do the program is having knowledge of Java is a plus, as well as just some basic introduction to front-end languages, the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript.
Thank you for answering that question. Hello, everyone. I'm sorry, I'm going to join in between because we have some audio issues and connectivity issues with Jeevat, but we can definitely continue the session. So thank you for answering that. And I noticed you mentioned some books for preparing for PM and all. So do you have any personal recommendations for PM books?
Right. I would say the book. Hold on a second. Let me just double check. Yep. Okay. So I would say the book that I recommend the most is Cracking the PM Interview. I think it's by Gail McDowell. I'm sure there's something like that, like Gayle, Cracking the PM Interview. That was a really useful book that I read because it went through, okay, what clubs or what groups should I be joining in order to best prepare for a PM internship? How should I organize my resume to apply for the internship? What types of questions will they be asking? Because that's the most unique thing about a PM role is that there can be 2 or 3 different types of questions they can ask, and you need to be prepared and have a framework and a structure to how you tackle these questions. I think that Cracking the PM Interview was the best book to prepare me for that. I do know that there are other books that also prepared you for that. I'm looking, I think it's called Swipe Right when it comes to like a PM preparation. I can find some more books and refer them because there's like a whole list of them.
Okay. So we'll definitely be posting the link in the description and make a separate post on our social media pages so y'all can know which books Governess recommends and has personally used. And so moving on to the next question. How should a person with little or no technical experience apply to a PM role?
Yes.
Like, are they more just on the business side, or I know you mentioned different technical PM as well as just product manager, but a lot of companies don't differentiate between the two. So what would you say if you don't have much technical experience on your resume? Would you still be asked for an interview, or what is it?
Yes, I think that's a really good question. And I think so because, as I mentioned before, you don't need to have a computer science degree in order to apply for a PM role. Now, I think it does give you an edge. I think coming from an engineering or a comp sci background does make you a stronger applicant. I don't think that it completely balances you out. Like I said, I know a lot of people who aren't even CS. They come from some other engineering role. I'm not even a CS major. I'm an industrial systems engineering major. I know people who come from like a business degree, or maybe they're majoring in finance or marketing. And the only difference in the application process is that they're going to be matched with a team that better suits their need. They're not going to be a technical PM. They're going to be like an associate PM, or they're going to be like just a feature PM.
Right.
So I think for the first thing is that you don't need to have a technical background. If you would like to be a PM that focuses on a more technical product, however, I would say the best way to prepare for those roles is to just start building. The PM role is essentially you're the one who's going to be leading a product to fruition, from the design, the brainstorming phase, to the engineering, to the publishing and releasing phase. And so if you want to be working on building a mobile application that kind of walks through that exact process, or get with a group of friends, or lead a tech project in one of your courses, I think that's the best way for you to prepare and to be exposed to different technologies, like learn about different languages, learn about the technical industry, so that you can talk about these things and say, hey, I'm knowledgeable about this field, and I can help lead a project from end to end on how to actually bring this to fruition.
Thank you. So what are the common misconceptions that you had about PM or see a lot of people have?
Yeah, so man, where do we start? So the first thing I mentioned before is that people think that you're going to be coding when you're a product manager. And for the most part, sorry to say, that's not going to be the case. May except 5-10% of PMs maybe code as part of their job with the engineers, but that's not going to be a very long-term thing. I think another thing that people tend to misconcept about is the role itself and what you actually do on the job. It is very much a people administrative role. It's people heavy. You're going to be spending 80 to 90% of your day in meetings, talking to people, collecting information, and then using then 10% maybe to synthesize that information to kind of, okay, based on what I've learned, here's what the design is going to look like, or here's the next direction, or what information do we need to get? And so if you want to, I know the PM is very glamorized, so it's a buzzword that people are using. It's a very like lucrative field to get into, but people don't realize that like the day-to-day is actually a bit mundane, and the exciting part of releasing a product that comes at the very end of the PM process.
So since you mentioned how it's not really what people are thinking it is, what is the day in the life of a PM at Microsoft?
Yes, so I can walk through my day-to-day and then maybe jump in on what other people have experienced. So for me, I would, so as I mentioned, it's extremely people heavy. So when I first come into the office, or, I log in, I check emails because you get a lot of them. It's not like a sweet software engineer internship or role where, you're coding all the time. You don't have to interact with people in the sense of like meetings 5-6 times a day. PM, I look at my emails, I respond to people. I then set up meetings with people, because it's like, okay, I need to learn what the design is going to look like, or what color should this be, or what would be the best color landscape for it. So you got to be setting up meetings with people, and then organizing your schedule. So that would be like the beginning part of my day. And then I said 75 to 80% of my day is in meetings. I am meeting with different departments. I'm meeting with my organization team. I'm asking the hard questions of, okay, when should this be released? When is it a good time? Or what is the logistics for this particular feature to be implemented from an engineering standpoint? Do we need more time? Do we need to expand it? What tools should we be using to design this? What target market are we going to be addressing with this product? And how are we going to be marketing it to these people? Those are all the big level questions when it comes to designing a product you need to answer. And I think the best way to describe it is a PM is a jack of all trades, master of none. A PM is not an engineer. They're not a designer. They're not a marketer. They are the person to pull on all those different teams, get that information from those people, and then they're basically the expert matter in what they're working on. Then they put it together for a product. And to do that, you have to talk to people. So that's pretty much the most of my day. And then if I have an hour or two left over, I then can say, okay, here's all the information I collected. What can I make of this? Okay, I know that this is the target audience. What should the marketing plan be? Maybe I need to consult with them tomorrow to confirm, okay, what engineering specs is feasible in this time frame. So if I have time, I can take the time to say, okay, how do I actually apply the information that I've had? So that's really the day-to-day. So maybe some of the more exciting parts at the end, it's like, okay, we're going to be making the presentation now. We got to be preparing to show this off to other people on the team. Maybe you're doing a UI mock-up of, okay, this is what the designers recommend. Here is what the design's going to look like. And then they can give feedback, and then they can go implement it. But that's like small parts in the process. The day-to-day is very meeting-oriented.
Nice. I think that's a very different perspective. I had no idea that it's going to be more meeting oriented than just coding. So what advice do you have for current students that are preparing for PM interviews or applying to PM roles in general, for internship as well as full-time roles?
Right. I would say the biggest piece of advice that I have is to start early. One thing to note is that for every PM internship available, there is like 20 to 30 software engineer internships available. It is, you don't need, like I said, there's one PM who like leads a certain team. So the demand is not very high in comparison to a software engineering role. So you need to be starting early. You need to be like, I would say now, as sad as it is, like now or in the next couple of weeks, start looking to see what roles are available and seeing what you want to work on and how you should apply. I would say now is a really good time to start preparing your resume and to start figuring out like, okay, how do I show off my experiences? Like, I worked on this application with a group of friends. How am I going to share that with an interviewer? Because that's part of the questioning of interviews for PMs, is that they're going to be asking you, how did you lead this product? Or what did it take? Or what were some considerations that you had? You need to be able to clearly express what you were working on. And so that takes time and that takes practice. So I would say definitely start early and really start to like quantify what you've been working on and expressing it in a clear and concise way to whoever you're going to be sharing it with.
Okay. So Thank you for answering these questions. I think we can move on to the comment section because I see a lot of comments over here. So
Okay, so I can just like start reading through and like picking out a question or so, right?
yeah.
Okay, so I see the first question. And sorry if I butcher any of your names. My deep apologies.
Oh, no.
So it is from Osho Priya, and the question is there a test one has to give for the Explore program? So if I'm understanding your question correctly, feel free to comment back in if I misinterpret it. So is there a test one has to give for the Explore program? So in terms of the application process, it's essentially applying for a SUI role. So I guess the test in that sense is like, there isn't really like a hacker rank. Maybe that's what you're referring to. There's not like a hacker rank or like any like code view or anything like that you have to do. You just fill out an application. If the recruiter really likes what they saw, they invite you to either a phone interview or a campus interview, depending on what your campus is. And if there's a recruiter in your area, that's a lot more, hey, like what technology do you like best? Or how would you improve this technology? Or explain a technical project you worked on. Just kind of getting a thorough understanding of your experience. If you pass that round, then you're extended an offer to go to onsite in the final round, which is usually in Redmond, Washington, where then you have 3 interviews, 2 of them technical, 1 of them PM. In that sense, they really ask basic questions because they know you're a freshman, sophomore. You may not have taken data structures and algorithms yet. So that's generally the structure. I hope that answered your question okay. And feel free to follow up if I missed a part of it. Okay. So, and this kind of ties into the next question by Neha. What's the application process like for Explore? I went through it, but I'm going to do it more in depth feature of what it was. I did touch on it in the previous question. So it started off, applications open up very, very soon. I will say, I think there was like 300 Explore interns last summer in Redmond, Washington specifically. So there's not a lot of spots. I recommend you like start applying sooner rather than later. And maybe it was 300 for that specific class. Don't quote me on the number. I would say like late August is when applications open, and then a lot of the roles are filled by November. So I would say first and foremost, start applying early. So then you will fill out an application online. It's very, very simple. They ask your resume, ask for a transcript, very fundamental things. May take like a week or so for them to get back to you. If they're proceeding with you to the next round, then as I mentioned, they have either on campus or the phone interview. I had the phone interview. Some people have it on campus, depending on what your recruiter and your whole situation is like. I don't think anything's going to be on campus this semester, given the whole situation with COVID-19. So I would expect the phone interview. They ask a lot of questions on, I remember the questions I had was like, name it, what technology would you improve? What project did you work on? Can you explain to me like your favorite language? This kind of asking, do you like technology? Can you talk about a project that you've worked on? Nothing, no tongue twisters, no like logic puzzles, just really interested in, do you like tech and can you explain it? Then the final thing is the final round interview in Redmond, Washington, or the onsite. This is where they give you 3 back-to-back interviews. 2 of them are technical, so coding interviews. 1 of them is a PM interview. So it's really like my PM interview was, can you talk about how would you improve I told them about a project I worked on, and the whole interview was how would you improve it? And we really broke down the steps of like, what you're looking for in a PM role. So I would say preparing for that. If you have some basic knowledge of data structures, that helps well, learning some lists, arrays, hash maps, linked lists. I would be very shocked if they ask questions about like graphs or trees, because once again, you're a sophomore or a freshman, you're not going to have that intensive data structured knowledge. So for me, it tended to be very simple, but if you have knowledge of those issues, that's a plus. So hope that answered your question okay. We have another question from Emily Flores. How does Google foster inclusivity and equity? That is a really, really good question. And that's one of the things that kind of drove me towards their program, was that in the program, in the software product sprint, they did a fantastic job of keeping their doors open and just making sure that we knew that as an underrepresented student in the tech field, that I felt like I belonged and I felt included. to start, this program started right when a lot of the stuff happening in Minneapolis occurred with George Floyd. And I'm currently in Minneapolis at the moment and when it occurred. So it was a really rough time for students during that point. And so they made it a point, like they were hosting coffee chats, like every week, just checking in. How are you doing? Can we talk more about these things? And really just making us feel as though we have a voice and that we are heard and that they aren't just ignoring the issue. I know a lot of people who they went to their internships and like nobody would talk about it. And that was really isolating because it's like, you have this group of people who are hurting and you're not even bringing light to it. And Google does a great job of making sure that they're addressing it head on. Some more formal things is that they definitely have ERGs or employee like resource groups. So, they have like the Blacks at Google, they have like, women in Google, focusing on LGBT communities as well. So they definitely make it their mission to have those open spaces for people at that company. And then they always, of course, there's this issue with like their philanthropy work and, how they engage people, mentorship programs to ensure, like I had a great mentor during the SPS program who I could talk to, and allowing us to kind of create our own initiatives or spaces. So that's just a taste. I'm sure if you were to go on their website and they can list off more formal ways that they foster inclusivity and equity. But during the SPS program, I felt very included. I felt as though it was a community to me. It felt like I could talk to anybody and they have their doors open. So I couldn't praise enough about how Google focuses on inclusivity and equity. Question from this LinkedIn user: what if you haven't taken calculus yet? So that I'm assuming that question was for the Explore internship program at Microsoft. It is a requirement. You do need to have taken Calc 1 and Calc 2 before you apply. That's why I will say that a lot of the people in the Explore program tend to be sophomores more than freshmen. I was a sophomore when I had gotten into the program, or at least I guess it's weird. I'm in like a 5-year program. So I guess I was like a sophomore back then, but it was like year 2 of 5. So you can apply if you're a freshman, but you do need to have taken both Calculus 1 and 2. So whether that be IB or AP programs that gives you those credits beforehand or anything else, but that is like a hard requirement. So I would just be sure to have that taken care of before you apply to it. Okay. I see a question from Sandra Janik. Is the internship available for all nations / are they remote or are they limited to a specific country? So I may not be the best person to respond to this. I'm currently in the US, so I have knowledge of how that works in the US. I'm sure this is going to look different for different countries, but I'm going to do my best to answer anyway. So is the internship available for all nations? I believe so. I know that there are different offices across the world. Like there are like many offices in the US, there are offices in Canada, there are offices in Europe, in Asia, in India as well. So I will say there are different offices, and you just need to make sure that when you apply, you indicate where you're at and where you want to apply to so that they can match you based on your demographic location. I will say that the head office is in Redmond, Washington. So that's where a lot of the resources are. So let's keep that in mind. Are they remote? Yes. This summer, they did make the program completely remote. I'm very grateful for that. They were able to make this a completely online program and accommodate for students. I know there were some issues with international students when it came to like the remote setting. I'm not an international student. I'm not the best advocate for that. I'm sure someone who experienced that could better elaborate on it more than I could. But for the US, at least, they did held it remote. Are they limited to a specific country? I don't believe so. Like I said, I know the COVID-19 situation made things a little different than usual, but for the normal internship program, they do try to make it as broad as possible. So like I said, may not have all the information on it, but that is what I currently know. Okay, then there's a question from Nishita and Bakar. How do sophomore / freshmen apply for PM roles? So that's another thing I want to touch on. That's a really good point, is that you don't necessarily have to apply to the Explore program as a freshman or sophomore. You are more than welcome to apply to a regular PM or SWE internship. You don't have to wait. It's just that the Explore program tends to be more lenient for freshmen and sophomores to apply because they know you don't have that experience. So it's easier in quotations for you to get in. But the process is the same as always. You would just turn in an application for a PM role, and if you go through the steps, then you could just be hired as a PM. Same process as the phone interview, and then there's the on-site. So it's not much different, but I will say that it's a bit more challenging for freshmen and sophomores to apply to those roles. But I've seen it. I know people who have applied for the Explore program, and they did so well that they got promoted to a SWE internship or a PM internship. So don't let that stop you, but they do encourage underclassmen to apply to Explore because it's easier to get in and it kind of matches your skill level. Give me a sec. Excuse me. Okay, so next question I see is from Neha. Was there a technical and behavioral interview for the Explore program? So yes, I would say the behavioral interview was more in the phone interview. So after you fill out your application, and the technical and coding interview, that was in the final round. There was still a little bit of behavioral interview questions in the final round as well, but the on-phone, there were no coding questions during that time. So make sure that you prepare for both moving forward. I see a question from Dev Wadhya. Do you need DSA as well? I'm gonna be very candid. I don't know what DSA is. Maybe someone else who has that knowledge that can respond to that.
I guess what he means is data structures and algorithms.
Oh, I see. Oh, okay. So that's a quote. Okay, that's like an acronym. You think I should know that? I will say for Explore, it's useful to have. They are going to be asking questions on that. Like I got asked a question about a linked list. So like you definitely, it can occur in your interviews. So it's definitely important for you to have knowledge of that. But as I mentioned before, if you're a freshman, if you've never taken data structures and algorithms, it doesn't completely count you out, but it does make you a stronger candidate to have that background. Now, for PM internship, not necessarily. Like I said, you don't really need coding knowledge to apply to that program, but the more coding experience you have, the better. It doesn't hurt you to have too much experience, but I don't think it's a necessity. And of course, for SWE, you should have data structures and algorithms. Then we have the next question from Lokendra. Do Google products happen in India as well? From my understanding, it happened in the US. Only, I may be wrong on that. You may have to double quote me on that. But just from my understanding, I thought it was only US only. But someone else can quote me on that as well. Yeah, it's only, you see it's only for North America. I was pretty under the impression that it was only for the US. So I think that's kind of what we're going to go with for now. Okay, hold on. I got to scroll back down here. Something. Okay, so I see a question from Mary Eng. What stands out in a resume with little technical background for PM? That is a really, really good question. I would say what stands out for a resume is leadership skills and leadership positions that you had when you were in your organization. So I think that's kind of the biggest thing, because that's what you're going to be doing in a PM team. You're going to be leading not really leading because you don't have any authority. I think that's another misconception that I didn't cover, is that people think being a PM is like being a CE. They say being a PM is like being a CEO of your own product. That's not true. A PM doesn't have any authority. They just need to have the leadership skills in order to bring people together to work on a product. So I think that's very important to have on a resume. Like if you are president of ACMW, or you have a leadership role in a consulting club, that can really speak volumes, because it shows that you have, not only did you establish the credibility to get the role, but also that you're capable of leading projects or leading initiatives within the organization, and that you can delegate people to do other work as well, which is also very important. So I would say if you don't have technical background, I would say really harbor on those leadership skills and maybe work on some side projects as well, just to pad your resume a little bit. So this kind of ties into the next question from Avni Handa. What kind of experience you think will suit best for a PM role? So leadership experience, I think, is very important. Strong communication skills as well, which kind of ties into that. If you have a leadership role on like a tech organization, that is preferred. What I guess I can tell you what I had when I applied. I worked, I did a little bit of consulting work within my school. There's like 180 degrees consulting, and I was able to like work on projects with that. And I think that was very helpful in me describing what I did. I had a lot of technical experience. I did research, and so I had a paper publication, and I can talk about that. I had prior internships, I worked in like front end, the developer work, as well as I did a lot of things like building mobile applications. So I could talk about that. So my case, it was very technical because I have an engineering degree. The PM roles that I was looking for tend to be more technical. But if you're looking for a non-technical role, there's still lots of experiences that you can have. And if you get any of the books that I recommend, you'll find that there isn't really like a cookie cutter way of what roles you need to be a PM, because there's always different teams that can match your skill level. So I wouldn't say, oh, to be a PM, I need to have like X amount of leadership roles and these specific criteria. Like, it's nothing like that. As long as you've had experience being a leader and leading projects and working on projects of any kind, that does make, and you can elaborate and communicate about that, that still makes you a very qualified candidate. Okay. There's a question for Anagya. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Are there programs similar to Explore for juniors? For the most part, I will say no. That's because for juniors, at that point, you're in your penultimate year, so your second to last year, you're going to be having an official internship. I see that in quotations because it's just a regular internship. And after you complete that, there's the expectation, if you were to be received a return offer, that you'd be going full-time. By the time you're a junior, you would have already been in your upper level courses. You would have already been exposed to, if not taken data structures and algorithms, you're already taking classes about operating systems, and you're already kind of in the weeds of your major. So there aren't really, because Explore internship is really an exploratory program. It's for freshmen and sophomores who haven't had that experience yet, and they need like an open door. There's a lot of programs like this. You have like Facebook University, Google Stop, things like that. They're targeted to get these young students into the pipeline to then grow into a regular intern and then a full-time offer later. So for juniors, no, they just tend to be regular internships because they have an expectation that you have the background already to kind of thrive in the internship program. Another question from Neha. What type of behavioral interviews questions can you expect for the Explore program, like about previous project and experience? Yes. So I can give like a broad overview of what I've heard other people have had, as well as a bit of my own experience. So behavioral questions, I think it's very important to just kind of practice the method of how you apply for them. So I'm sure many of you have heard of the STAR method. So the situation, that's funny, I don't even remember the acronyms for it. Somebody type in the acronyms. But the STAR method is a really good way for you to kind of break down the problem that you have at hand and then applying that to explaining what you did. I think that's a good framework. Look it up if you haven't heard of it before. In terms of the type of questions that you receive, I think it's very much of what projects have you worked on? Why are you interested in technology? Why are you interested in Microsoft? How have you worked on a team before? Did you face any conflicts? What's your favorite technology? How would you improve it? Why is it your favorite technology? So it's very much, there isn't like a very specific Microsoft only Explorer question that they ask. Excuse me. Sorry, it's tickling my throat. But I would say just a very general database of behavioral questions that are available. I would say really polish it up. And I think that's important for any interview you do, not even for Microsoft. Just having a good idea of how you're going to answer those very basic, can you tell me about yourself? Why are you interested in Explore? Why are you interested in Microsoft? Why software engineering? Why PM? Those really basic level questions you should always kind of have an idea of how to answer regardless of the position that you have. Okay. So I see next question from Tasnia. Does someone with a CS degree with good knowledge of different aspects of marketing have an upper hand while landing a PM job / internship? That is a great question. And yes, a PM internship is essentially you're working on technical products from a business perspective. It's very much a people management, people-oriented role. If you have experience, like if you understand, like the TAM, SAM, like that, like not technical, like the marketing audience of like how you market to people. If you have an idea of like legal sense, or like how you would act, what the legal implications of collecting data, or the legal implications of releasing a certain product. If you have understanding of finance, okay, how much is this going to cost? How are we going to budget this? that is going to be immensely helpful for you. So not only do you have the technical experience to talk to somebody and talk to an engineer about how this would be implemented, but you also have the experience of, okay, how are we actually going to bring this to light? Or even better, if you have a design background, not only can you tell people how to build it, you can also tell people how to design it. You can build the UI mockups, show that to the designer and say, here is why I made the decisions that I did. I will say a PM internship is a combination of this tech, there is design, and then there's business. If you have the trifecta of all three, that makes you the strongest candidate for a PM role of any kind. However, if you're only focusing on design, you can still be a PM. There are plenty of design-based PMs who, they're really focused on like trying to decide how something's going to look, and then they pass it on to the engineers. If you're only focused on business, there are PM roles for those who have business-related majors, and same for computer science majors. So don't feel as though you need to be good at all three to be a PM, but if you happen to have all three or even like a couple of them, that does make you a stronger candidate. So great question. Can you suggest the beginner for product manager internship? Just beginner for product manager internship. I'm not quite sure what you mean when you say suggest the beginner for product manager internship. If you'd like to clarify that question maybe later on in the comments, I'd love to get back to this, but I don't think I fully understand what you're asking. So then, hold on. Here we go. So another question from Neha. Thanks for answering my question. You're welcome. Thank you for asking. How did you prepare for technical interviews for Explore? Would you recommend LeetCode? So that's actually really funny. I did not know what LeetCode was when I applied for the Explore program. Like I had cracking the coding interview, which was the same person who were cracking the PM interview. It's all like one big system. And I had read through that. I would say for technical interviews for Explore, having strong knowledge of some of the fundamental data structure. So strings, lists, arrays, hash maps, linked lists. If you happen to know graphs, if you happen to know trees, binary search, those like sorting algorithms, that's a bonus. I don't know if they're going to be asking you about those more higher level data structures, but I would say definitely the fundamentals you should have down. You should have a fundamental knowledge of computer science in and of itself for Explore, because Explore is more software engineering than it is PM. So like maybe like understanding like, oh, when would you use a linked list versus an array, things like that. Or can you explain abstraction in the context of Python if that's like your language that you use? So having that fundamental theoretical knowledge of comp sci is important. When it comes to coding interviews itself, I used the book to really explain like how they broke through different problems. I didn't do like LeetCode or HackerRank, like practice overload. Would that have made me a stronger candidate? I think so. I would recommend you doing that. I would say focus on LeetCode, easy, medium. As I mentioned, this is for freshmen and sophomores. There are very few times they're going to ask you a LeetCode hard if you're just a freshman coming into like comp sci. So I would say focus a lot of your work on that. If you can do the hard questions, even better. It's a bonus. It shows your proficiency. And also, last thing for this question, make sure you understand how you can explain like the time and space complexity for products. So if you write an algorithm, you should be able to explain what's the runtime, what's the space complexity of this, what are some trade-offs when you're building the algorithm, should you do something that's more efficient in terms of how it runs, or maybe you're using too much space. You should be able to communicate that. And all the topics I covered, that should, depending on your school, those things should be covered in your school. The fundamentals of computer science, or the theoretical aspects of it, maybe an introduction to data structures, some of the basic ones, and then runtime and space complexity. I know my school, we had a separate class for like data structures and algorithms, so that was more like junior level. So hopefully that answered your question. Okay, so another question from Neha. Since I'm a freshman and applications open in late August, where do I put my high school transcript in the Explore application? So I think they ask for that. I believe I had to put my transcript down. You may not have. It may look a little different than how I described it, because I did this like a year ago. But it wouldn't be any different if you're a freshman. I mean, obviously your resume and your transcript are going to have high school related courses, because that's where you are at the moment and that's what they're going to expect. So I don't think there's like a separate place you put your high school transcript or anything. And same for your resume. You just kind of have to make it look the best that you can. And of course, the classes you took in high school are going to matter. So just keep that in mind. Okay. From LinkedIn user, what to do if you miss the official internship opening by Microsoft. So the applications have not opened yet, or at least they're going to open very, very soon if they have not already, I would say. So I don't think you've missed it yet. So plenty of time. I will say that you have from now until like November for the majority of roles. Now that's not a hard-coded rule. I know a lot of people who they applied in January of the following year and they still got an internship at Microsoft. Not all the roles are going to be filled up by November, but I would say a majority. And if you want the strongest chance of not, I know people who applied for the internship and then it was like, oh, sorry, you did a really good job applying, but you're on the wait list. Like I was on the wait list when I applied, and I applied in like late August and I did the interview, and then it was by late September, they contacted me and they're like, sorry, due to the sheer number of applicants, we're going to have you on the wait list before we give you a final interview. And then I emailed them, and then I got off the wait list and I was then offered the final round interview. But that was like late September. So I would say to maximize your chances, do it early, but it's not too late. You still have a lot of time. Would you say that referral is important for the Explore program by Ali? That's another thing too. I think I was really behind when it came to applying. I didn't get a referral for the Explore program. I guess maybe it was like a lead. So some people ask what's the difference between like a referral and a lead. So like a lead is kind of like your name is kind of there on like an app from your recruiters is like, oh, here's a student to look out for, versus a referral, which is like somebody from the actual company thinks you're a really good candidate for what you're applying for. I think I had a lead in that sense. Where a recruiter reached out to me and they told me to apply. So somebody was looking out for my application. So I didn't have a referral. I think a referral is important no matter where you go, because it's those connections and someone who can advocate for your skills. And that gives you an edge. Your resume is not just going to go down in the ever void of nobody's looking through it. So I think it is important. I didn't have one. And I know a lot of people who didn't have one as well. I also know this is challenging because, as a freshman, sophomore, you may not have those connections. Like I didn't have those connections. I'm just starting to build those referral connections now, and I'm going to be a junior. So it definitely, if you can get one, it definitely advocates your strengths, and I think it'll give you a leg up, but I would not worry if you don't get one. Next question is from Cigar, sorry. Is Explore program only for women? That's actually a really interesting question. So the Explore program is targeted for underrepresented minorities in STEM. They say that on their website. This is not no news. They're targeted towards women. They're targeted towards underrepresented communities. So you have like the Black, African American, Hispanic, Native American community. That is what the program is targeted towards. That doesn't mean that men can't apply or that they haven't gotten in. That doesn't mean that those from like the Asian or Asian American community haven't applied and haven't gotten in. That's very much the case. It's not only for those programs, but I will say that it is targeted for women and students of underrepresented backgrounds in STEM specifically. So just keep that in mind, is that is what their target, because they really want to try to promote diversity and inclusion and representation in Microsoft. So this is a great pipeline for those students. So keep that in mind. That's actually a really good question. Any programs for fresh graduates? I imagine fresh graduates from college. I mean, I don't think Microsoft has those programs. I know a lot of places may have like, a rotational program for like APMs. I know like Lyft has one, for example. I know Uber has one. Not through Microsoft to my knowledge. If you're going to be applying for a program, it's just going to be a flat out SWE internship or PM internship. There's no fresh graduates only programs to my knowledge. From LinkedIn user, can you please guide the path for an undergraduate who is more into leadership and not that much into coding to get into Microsoft? Okay, that's a really good question. I think this can have several things depending on your major. I mean, leadership is pretty broad. I mean, leadership could really mean anything, but I'm going to take it from the broad sense. You can still apply to a PM internship without much coding. As I mentioned before, there are plenty of opportunities for you you can be a PM. If finance is your thing, there's like a finance rotational program you can apply for. What other programs are there available? I guess I only know, there's like a legal application you can apply to. There's a marketing. I guess there's like a PMM or PMM internship at Microsoft, which is like a product marketing manager, which is basically a PM for those who are in marketing. So there are those programs. So I will say you do not need to know how to code to get an internship at Microsoft or to be a PM. It is a tech company. So of course, any coding skills you do have will give you a leg up, but it is not necessary to get a job there. What are some programs for fresh graduates? As I mentioned, I don't think there's any for Microsoft, so I'm just going to skip through that one. What skills did you gain from the Explore program from NEHA? That's a really good question. So what I had learned, I can tell you about my Explore experience. I worked on something called the developer division within Microsoft. So that really covers some of the tools that Microsoft engineers used. So I worked on Visual Studio, the IDE, and I worked on like the .NET team that kind of worked on building. We worked with Roslyn, which is, you can look it up on GitHub. It is an open source set of compilers and APIs that are really used to kind of target and like strengthen the IDE itself. It works a lot with IntelliSense, so you know how when you're typing up something and then the IDE kind of fills in the rest for you. I worked on that team that did that work. So I definitely learned a lot about just being a software engineer. Like, you know, you have the process of, you don't really know what you're working on. You're going to have to take a couple weeks to look through the code base to understand what you're going to be working on. It's not like in class where here is the code you're going to be building. Now write it. You know, it's very nice and neat and organized because you're a student. In the real world, you're not going to know, you're going to be given stuff you've never seen before in your life. And it took me like a week just to kind of understand the code base I'd be working with. I learned a lot about the PM role, which is why I actually am a PM intern now, is because I had 4 weeks of exposure to a PM role. And I saw that and I'm like, wow, this is actually really interesting. We got to do a lot of like UX research. We got to bring people in and ask them about what our product was and, you know, if they had any feedback or any ways to improve it. We got to write like a white paper on that. And so it was definitely a great way to learn more. Like the rotational program is focused towards helping you understand what opportunities are at Microsoft, and they did a fantastic job of doing so. Learned a lot about, like code reviews. So when you write your code, you think, oh, it's good and gone. No, that's not that. You have to test your code. You have to submit your code for a review on GitHub. And then you're going to have somebody review your code, rip it to shreds. And then you look at it and it's like, okay, I got to improve it, make it more efficient. So that was a really humbling process, I will say, because it really taught me, man, it's like, there's a lot more work into being a software engineer. There's a lot of like extra steps you have to do. And I think the biggest thing out of all that is just working in a professional environment. I had internships before, but this is like a big Fortune 500 tech company. I had never had that experience. And as you know, underclassmen, it was a really rare experience for me to be given this much power. And so I got to learn about how to be professional in the workplace, how to work with other people. You know, I was in a pod of 2 other interns. We had to work together. It wasn't just me, you know, doing check-ins with my manager, doing check-ins with my mentors, asking for help. These were all skills I kind of had to pick up on the job. So the Explore program is a great way to do it when you're young, because once you're a software engineer intern or a PM intern, they're expecting that you're like a junior level and you're still learning, but you're kind of at a higher state than an Explore, especially in terms of pay. So give me a sec. I just need to plug in my computer. It's gonna die. Okay, shift over here. So the next question we have is from Panchel. In terms of previous projects, can you give us an idea of what you did or where we can start? Also, thank you for providing your insights you're providing. I really appreciate it. Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. Previous projects. So for me, I think the best way to do, honestly, there's not like a right way to do it. I think you should just build what you want to build and then look up how you can do it. So for me, I wanted to learn how to build a website. So I have to look up resources of, okay, what languages do I need to build a website? What frameworks do I need to utilize? How do I get it set up? It really is, when it comes to building projects, it takes a level of initiative to do it. You know, everybody says you need to be building projects and stuff, but if you don't want to build a project, then you're not going to do it. So there isn't like you should build an app because everyone's telling you to build an app. You should build an app because you want to build an app. Like I built a website because I wanted to build one. Another experience I had was I was doing research. You know, some people, maybe they don't want to do like their own personal projects. They just want to work on things. And while I advocate for personal projects because it shows initiative, my biggest experience when I applied was I did research. regarding virtual reality and its implications within the infrastructure world. And I was able to get a paper published from that. And that's basically what I talked about in my interviews, how I was able to learn about coding in VR spaces and using the hardware, the software, and kind of how I applied that in writing the paper. So I would say, in terms of where to start, think about what you want to build and just build it. Obviously, it's not that simple, but it really comes down to there isn't like an outline of what you should build for Microsoft to notice you. It really should be, you should be building things that you're passionate about and things that you want to see in the world. So I think that would be a good place for you to start. Ooh, like this question from, I'm going to butcher this, my apologies. Yashavini, my apologies. Switching between SDE profile and PM roles, how to go about it as a fresher to graduate next year. So I think that's kind of something that I'm actually doing right now, is I'm actually switching between being a PM and maybe transitioning back into being a software engineer intern or full-time, depending on what you're doing. When you transition, you do have to re-interview for the role. But obviously, like, I'm still at Microsoft, whether or not I choose to be a software engineer. But when I actually got a return offer for being a PM intern, and I also got an offer to be a software engineer intern. The return offer from a PM side, I just did that because I did my 12 weeks and I had a great project and they gave me an offer to come back. For the software engineer internship, I had to re-interview. So I had to do 3 back-to-back interviews just like before. It's going to be technical this time. And I was offered that if I were to go. So that's the process. But you can do it at any time. I will say that it's easier for you to go from software engineering to PM than the other way around. And that's because, as I mentioned before, you don't need the technical skills to be a PM. If anything, the technical skills make you a stronger candidate, but it's not necessary. And the skills you learned as a software engineer can help you in a PM. On the other hand, if you're a business PM and you're trying to go to a software engineering role, it's going to be really challenging because you don't have that technical knowledge. I was able to do it because I'm an engineer. I've taken computer science courses. So doing that transition wasn't challenging for me. And it probably won't be challenging if you're a computer science major. But I would say if you want to switch from PM to SWE, do it early in your career. Don't wait, because it'll be harder the longer you wait. Okay. So I see a question, how did you prepare for your PM interview? Yes, so mine was a little different because I went from Explore to PM. As I mentioned, the Explore internship is a pipeline. So I didn't have to do the whole process of applying for a PM interview as I did before. What I ended up doing was I had bought the Cracking the PM interview book that I mentioned, and I started just practicing problems. I had mentors who would give me mock interviews and help prepare me. Like, one question that I received was, explain the mall to your grandma, which seems like a really weird abstract question, but it really shows your problem solving skills, how you break down what you're going to say, how you think about your target audience, any considerations, the limitations that you have with the problem. So it really comes down to learning about the different types of problems. So they're situational, like, explain the mall to your grandma. There's quantitative, so it's like there are like 50 Wi-Fi spots in Minneapolis, like how per square feet, how many do you need to build to cover the entire city of Minnesota? Like, there's like those quantitative questions that you need to learn about how to scale up or scale down. So, and you learn that through the books and you learn that through practice. So that's kind of how I prepared for it, was just reading the book, learning about the different problems, and then mock interviewing with my mentors. See. Okay, how did you learn from Anna Maria? How do you learn more about companies for the interviews? So there are a couple ways you can do that. One is just going on the company website. This is the most basic way to do so, because you get just information on what they're doing, what they're building, their beliefs, their value, and their mission statement. It gives you a good foundation. To learn about specific teams, I would say this is where you tap into your network, where you reach out to people who've worked at Microsoft and they can tell you about how it's been. They can tell you about the different teams that are there. And that gives you a better understanding, because when you're interviewing, if you don't know anything about the company, that's going to look really bad on you. You want to come in with at least some knowledge of what you need to do and what you should be, or what to expect. If they ask you, what do you know about Microsoft? And you can't explain what Microsoft is or what they do, that's going to look really bad. So I would say the website or any online public knowledge that you can gather, And then also for specific information, reaching out to your network and seeing if someone can do an informal interview and ask and tell you about their experience. Okay, so then, last question. I don't know if the last question, but from Pranchal, what's your favorite thing about being a PM? That's a really good question. I would say the best thing about being a PM for me has been the connections that I've made. Being a PM, you're meeting with people pretty much all of the time. My whole day is dedicated towards meeting with people and getting information, learning. They're experts in their field, and they're telling me how I can use what they know to apply to my project. And that's been great, honestly. As a software engineer intern, you don't really get to do that. You're kind of your nose deep building your code, building your product, and then you're occasionally referring to people for help. Where as a PM, you have to refer to people. You have to lean on people's knowledge to help you with your project. And all the people that I've connected with and I was able to build credibility with, and now my name's out there and people know who I am, they know the product I've made, that's been really cool. Another thing, quick thing, is being able to say that I led this initiative. I think there's a difference between being a SWE, who it's like, oh, I've built this feature, versus being a PM, where it's like, I led this entire process of building this from end to end. I wasn't just working on the engineering part. I worked on the designing, the brainstorming, the marketing, the release. There's this bit of ownership when you're a PM where you really get to lead an entire product. And that's something that can be really gratifying for people.
So thank you so much, Governess. That was a great session. You covered a lot of questions in depth, in detail, and I'm sure everybody enjoyed and took a lot of valuable information. If anyone has any further questions, you can reach out to Governess. We'll be posting her link in the description in our YouTube video, as well as probably make a post on it, or you can just look up her name on LinkedIn and you can find her. Mm-hmm. And thank you. Do you have anything to say?
Thank you guys so much for having me here. This was great. I really enjoyed being able to share my experiences. If you have any other questions, as mentioned before, about being a PM or Explorer or the Product Sprint program, feel free to reach out to me via LinkedIn. I will be more than happy to answer them.
Thank you, Governess. Everyone, we have started an open source challenge to get you started into open source. And if you're a beginner, it's especially recommended. So within 30 days, we've structured out like a timeline to get you started. So if you're interested, the link is also in the comments. And hope everyone enjoyed this video. Thank you. Bye.